Hello and greetings to everyone. I'm Archita Mishra, Policy Analyst at Paris 21, the Partnership in Statistics for Development in the 21st Century. We welcome you to the session on When Rubber Hits the Road, how can statistical offices lead the way in building trustworthy data ecosystems? It's organized as part of the virtual UN World Data Forum 2020. Just as a preamble, it's not an exaggeration to say that Truth has been having a difficult time of it lately. Earlier this year, at the Munich Security Conference, World Health Organization Director General Dr. Tedros said, "We're not just fighting an epidemic, we're fighting an infodemic." And since the onset of COVID-19, the public has been confronted with a deluge of information, statistics, and data from all over the place. These data are often of variable quality, sometimes conflict with one another, and leave the layperson more confused than informed. Even policymakers and experts across countries have been misguided by these unverified data sources. However, even as the COVID-19 crisis revealed fissures in modern information governance and the data ecosystem, the crisis of trust in data, evidence, and institutions predates the ongoing pandemic. Against the larger background of the contemporary post-truth digital era, with competing numbers, disinformation campaigns, and socio-political polarization, there's a renewed impetus on national statistical offices, or NSOs, to increase trust in official data and statistics and serve as a steadfast base for what constitutes as trustworthy information and evidence in our societies. So today's session seeks to unpack exactly this. What is the role of national statistical systems in this broader context? What are the implications of a fragmented information landscape for NSOs today? And what are some of the key action areas for NSOs to build trust in their data and institutions? Joining us in this discussion, we have a diverse set of esteemed panelists from statistical offices, the parliament, civil society, academia, and international organizations. To address this rather complex issue, we will conduct the session in two parts. The first one will focus on how we can rethink the production and governance of statistics. And the second will delve into how statistics are communicated, perceived, and used. In each part, one of our speakers will present a quick explainer pitch relating to the specific aspect of building trust, followed by an interactive panel discussion and commentary by other panelists. However, before I proceed with this, I would like to invite my colleague, Dr. Johannes Juting, to kindly set the scene and anchor us in the broader context of today's dialogue. Johannes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ashita. I'm so excited that we can kick off this panel. It's a very important one. But let me just introduce myself. My name is Johannes Juting. I'm the executive head of Paris 21. Well, I think overall this conversation about trust and data and statistics couldn't be more timely. I think as we can observe in many countries, we are now ahead of a second wave of the COVID-19 virus. And the question of data and statistics is coming more and more into daily conversations again. And if we step back for a second, one can say that the pandemic, when it really started early this year, you could argue that on the one hand, it has been some sort of even a blessing for data and statistics people and also for official statistics, because at least the interest in numbers has increased. The interest in data and statistics and science has really increased, and also is now part of dinner table conversations, and people start to ask important questions. What does it mean in R value? What does it mean in infection rate? And why do people talk with different data, come to same conclusions, and sometimes with same data to different conclusions? So on the one hand, certainly the crisis has led to more interest into important conversation on data statistics. On the other hand, though, we can also see that people get increasingly confused and that there is a loss in trust eventually in data and statistics overall. And this confusion or this mistrust comes maybe from two things. One is that we can observe that there are huge data gaps in terms of measuring the pandemic itself, but also measuring the impact. And people say, why don't we have granular data about this and that? Why don't we have more timely data? But also at the same time, we have eventually even too much data, because we can see that there are more and more data providers putting out data, and we can see conflicting numbers. So this sets a little bit the scene of this conversation about how can national statistical offices play a role and which role should they play in this current conversation, but even beyond, in a modern data ecosystem 4.0 to this effect. So I'm so delighted that we have a wonderful panel today who will help us to answer a couple of very important questions. The first question could be, should national statistical offices at all engage in this kind of conversation, and what would be their role in terms of maintaining or at least help to strengthen trust in data and numbers, and also in government decisions? I mean, government these days take very important decisions, and we are living in France these days, and there's a current conversation if there will be a second regional lockdown based on data. So what is the role? Is there a role for National Statistical Office to help make governments good decision? And if yes, which role could they play? Or should they stay away? Because if you get into the conversation, you are part of it, and you might be feeling seen as a part of those conversations. So with this, I think, Ashita, I just wanted to say this at the outset. I think this panel couldn't be more timely. And I'm so happy that we have these great panelists. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Ashita, back to you.
Thank you, Johannes, for the great background on the issue. Without further ado, I would like to kickstart the first part of today's discussion on rethinking how statistics are produced and governed, for which we will invite our first speaker, Mr. Albrecht Werthmann. Albrecht Werthmann is the deputy head of the Unit for Methodology and Innovation in Official Statistics at Eurostat, where he is focusing on developing and implementing the concept of trusted smart statistics. Albrecht, over to you.
Okay, good. I will talk about the concept of trusted smart statistics as we are trying to develop it at Eurostat within the European statistical system. We have seen in the past years that there are a lot of new data sources are coming up that are triggered due to the digitalization of our economy and society. And these data are different, and also the approach to this data should be different for integrating them into official statistics. In the past, official statisticians had the total control over the data collection, the processing of the data, and then extracting information out of these data and producing statistics out of that. Data collections in forms of surveys were done for the purpose of producing statistics. This has changed a bit with the inclusion of administrative data, which are not collected for the purpose of statistics, but which are then used in official statistics. Still, this data is with the government, and so the statisticians are controlling then the data production. This has completely changed. Now there are a plethora of new data sources coming up, and it's not anymore feasible to integrate it simply into the statistical production process as it is, so to take the total control out of it, but we have to think of new approaches there. Also, the data has to be repurposed. They are not collected for producing statistics, but for other purposes. And the data environment is quite volatile. That means we do not have control over the production of these data, and also not control over the producers of these data. This introduces some changes. So in principle, we have to re-engineer the system of producing then official statistics. And we thought about this, and our approach is this trusted smart statistics. In principle, we have to shift from the focus on the data to the focus on methodology and put in the focus on the processing. We are not interested in the grapes, but we are interested in the wine that comes out of this. So we have to then share these developments, the methodological developments, then with the data producers. and to introduce then the total transparency into this process. And we have to introduce data redundancy, because all these, most of these data sources only reflect a part of the reality, and we have to collect more data sources into the statistical production process to get some notion of, or to get the notion of quality there. We will still be responsible about the production process, but part of the production will be then not take place in the statistical office. And for creating trust, it's a condition that we do the methodological development in total transparency, that we engage with other with the data sources, with other stakeholders like the science in developing these approaches. So we argue that we have to have a maximum transparency, not only on the methodology, but also on the processes and the codes that are developed, that these can be publicly scrutinized, that these are audible, that everybody can take a look on it. And in this way, we think that we can create trust. Quite a lot of these data also concern very sensitive information. So we have to think as well of privacy enhancing methods, also for reducing then the risk that data are misused and the data are disclosed. With this, we think we have higher risks in the data that require stronger safeguards. But with these stronger safeguards and also the openness in the methodology, we think that we can create more trust in the data and also in the information that we are producing, and that we then also, creating more trust, can access also further data and even then produce then more information coming from these new data sources. So in this way, introducing stronger safeguards, introducing an openness in the methodology, participating different stakeholders, I think we can succeed in including more data into the process. And with this, I would like to thank you.
Thank you, Albrecht. That was a really insightful pitch on the evolution of this traditional statistical production, and outlines that, given the availability of, new digital data sources and technologies, NSOs need to adapt on how they operate to reassert their role in modern democratic society. And such evolution arguably entails a fundamental paradigm shift for the role of NSOs, which is a great segue into the next trust determinant, which relates to the governance of official statistics. For this, I would like to invite our second panelist, Rosemary McCraw, who is the Chief Enterprise Architect at Statistics New Zealand, in data system leadership, and that's the area where the government's chief data steward function is led from. Rosemary, we've had this reckoning that, with different data being generated behind our backs and processed by techniques we don't necessarily fully understand from different interests, there's a call for statistical offices to go beyond their traditional remit of data production and kind of be the central coordinator of the modern data ecosystem. And Statistics New Zealand has been the front runner in many ways in this regard. And could you tell us more about the experience of Statistics New Zealand and making this transition?
Thank you, Achita. Yes, I'm quite excited to be on this panel, and I think, as Johannes said, it is quite a exciting, challenging, opportunistic time for NSOs around the world to be one part of the data conversation, but I guess also as a bit of a lead in to the presentation that I'm quickly going to give, is around the stewardship and that coordination type role and making sure all the players are playing their parts, not just the NSOs. So I'll now try and share my screen. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So hello, everybody. And before actually moving into the theme for today's session, I did just want to tell you about New Zealand's context. So all NSOs have a suite of characteristics that are similar, but we all operate in different contexts. And so to presume we can just do lift and shift of some of the ideas we have or the roles we play is a little naive. And so I thought I should talk about what New Zealand's context is so that you can use that when I talk about the government chief data steward role. So New Zealand is quite small. So our population is approximately 5 million. We also have a very simple form of government. So we have one federal government and a number of local bodies. StatsNZ is also a centralised NSO, although it doesn't produce all of the official statistics of New Zealand, and it does lead the official statistics system, but we do produce the majority of economic, social and environmental indicators, particularly those that are used for international comparability. And it is still really around providing the cornerstone of democracy and support public confidence in good government. So it's smaller than a lot of the people we're going to hear from today, but it does give you that real flexibility to be agile and respond to the needs of your country. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the journey towards data stewardship in the New Zealand data ecosystem. And it actually started back in 2014 when there was a review done by what was then the State Services Commission. So they managed the performance of the New Zealand Public Service. And during that review, it became really clear that the context in which we operate had really changed. A lot of it was driven by technological innovation, and the fact that so much data was becoming digitized, whether it was planned in terms of capturing data or that offshoot of transactional data. But the entire data system, which used to be controlled, as pointed out by Albrecht, was suddenly having all these new sources that we needed to understand. But more importantly, that was occurring everywhere, not just for the NSO. And so what they really saw was a critical need for collective network leadership to unlock the value of New Zealand's strategic data assets. Since that 2014 review, we've been on a very significant journey, reorienting as a national statistical office, broadening our role into the New Zealand data system. And in addition to our ongoing leadership of official statistics, we also developed the Integrated Data Infrastructure, or the IDI, some of which you may have heard of, but it's really a place where we look to leverage the value that's contained in New Zealand's data and make it available to researchers and policymakers for their decision making. Through the development and stewardship of the IDI, StatsNZ was able to unlock more value from the strategic data assets held by government, and also demonstrated that it could support a functional leadership role and be a centre of excellence. So in 2017, the StatsNZ Chief Executive was appointed to the Government Chief Data Steward functional leadership role in recognition of the growing value of an investment in data across government departments. And in September 2018, that mandate was further strengthened to enable the Government Chief Data Steward to set mandatory standards and guidelines for collection, management and use of data by government agencies, and to direct government agencies to adopt common capabilities such as data tools, linking infrastructure and sharing platforms. As StatsNZ continue to collaborate across government to embed the role of the Government Chief Data Steward, expectations are increasing in relation to our ability to work on long-term solutions, improving the quality of administrative data, influencing the government's spend on data, ensuring investments will be focused at achieving benefits across the system, and particularly in emerging areas such as data ethics and the need for reputable, unbiased data to support the increasing use of algorithms in artificial intelligence. A key focus for the Government Chief Data Steward's role is promoting trust and confidence in New Zealand's data system. Trust is a key democratic value and is vital to the success of many public policies, especially those which rely on data to assess their impact. Prior to 2018, StatsNZ undertook a use and trust in official statistics survey. Results from this indicated a high level of trust in the organisation among the general public, although this trust was considered to be uninformed trust rather than informed trust. And so we wanted to move the public's perception of our activities to a more informed basis via a communication strategy underpinned by 4 social license pillars. In 2018, 19 and 20, we commissioned a national quantitative survey to understand the social license StatsNZ has with the public of New Zealand in relation to their data, into our data stewardship role. StatsNZ's social license is defined as the permission it has to make decisions about management and use of the public's data without sanction. The 2020 results are not available yet, but 2018 provided the benchmark, and in 2019, the high-level findings were that trust in StatsNZ's purpose and our ability to manage personal information and its benefit to society and safety in keeping that personal information safe were rated far more highly than our openness, transparency, and inclusion of public views in our decision making. Again, that relates to some comments Albrecht made in his presentation. Our journey continues, but we hope this has given you a quick insight into this and our learnings, which will help us take our leadership role further. Tēnā koutou. Thank you. Back to you, Ashita.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. This was quite instructive for us to see an example of how modern data ecosystem governance could look like, especially like the proactive approach to measure trust. At this point, maybe I'll request you to maybe stop sharing your screen so we can have a panel discussion and see each other more clearly. And open the floor for other panelists if they have any comments or immediate questions, because I have quite a few for both Albert and Rosemary. So a quick check-in with our panelists in case there's anything burning that they would like to ask at this point. Okay. So maybe I'll just start with Rosemary because that's really fresh with us. So your presentation was quite timely and particularly interesting in the view of some reports of trust deficit that was observed in 2018 after the first online census that StatsNZ had implemented. Apparently the response rates were fairly low, and that created kind of some media reports that said that questioning the trustworthiness of the data, but also the institution. I just wanted to see how the journey has been since then, since that deficit was observed, and also has the current scenario, due to COVID-19 has changed things? Has that implicated statistics NZ in any way in terms of your trustworthiness?
So I'll just make a slight correction. So it wasn't our first online census, but it was the first time that we used that as the primary method. So heavily promoting the use of the online platform. And yes, you're correct. So we had significant interest in both the response rates that we achieved overall and basically the need to heavily utilize administrative data to fill gaps in our census, but more specifically the issues were around our Indigenous populations, so Maori, but New Zealand also has a high percentage of the Pacific community. There were a number of reviews done at the time, including the expert data quality panel who looked at individual variables for individual communities, so to quite low levels of granularity. And I think the largest hit of that trust was trust in us running the census this time. So for ours will be 2023. And so what were we going to do different? And who did we need to engage in making sure that we are able to understand the society at the time, because that's the other thing, you can't make assumptions about where society is at now compared to where it might be in 2023. And I guess nothing has given us more of an insight into that than COVID. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but Stats NZ has a commercial data arm called Data Ventures. And they used quite a lot of private sector data around telephone, cellular towers and card data to actually understand whether New Zealanders were staying home during our lockdown and what were our spending habits. And actually the provision of some of that information, the move towards trying to provide some really timely information around trade, around, well, everybody kind of understood vaguely what was happening in tourism and those kind of things, but actually having numbers in the recovery type phases, people are really interested in employment. And so quite a lot of new shorter term indicators have become available. And the feedback is that we're seen as being responsive, and that is generating trust as well, and transparent about what we're doing. So putting a lot of effort into explaining the numbers, what they're good for, what they're not good for, still producing the official statistic. And so these are really, you know, put out there as early indicators, and then the official statistic comes in to back those up. And the evidence is that those things have made a difference to how some people feel. Now, that's not how everybody feels, but how some of our key users feel about trust and confidence in the organization.
Thanks so much, Rosemary. I'm looking at Walter, who was raising his hand. Walter?
Yes, thank you, Arshita. Question to Rosemary. First, I would like to, to appreciate that Statistics New Zealand again is pioneering and showing the way in which statistical offices will have to go. My first question is, if we look at what IBM did some 15 years ago, then they changed their business model from a producer of hardware mainly to a mixed producer of, let's say, commodities and services. And my question is whether this is the future, or I believe that this is the future of official statistics, that official statistics will continue to produce own facts with a quality stamp, but in addition, provide services for other producers or for the society. Data stewardship is one of these services. I could imagine that a second service is, for example, quality standard setter, also for statistics produced outside, and certifier. And a kind of statistical advisor. Take the COVID situation. How important would it have been that statistical offices in the very, very beginning had offered their knowledge, their capacities to combine the, the virological data with the population data, and all the schemes that we have at hand. So there are quite a couple of services that I could imagine that statistical offices could provide based on additional capacities and budget, of course. Second question is to Rosemary. I think that, as you have explained, in New Zealand, your way to the political decision makers is relatively short. In bigger countries like my own one in Germany, the statistical office is not at the, I'd say, highest level of political recognition. So how did you succeed in, let's say, opening the doors to become the key player for data stewardship? So what would you advise other countries and other statistical offices, how they could, let's say, improve their political reputation and standing? Thanks.
Gosh, they're not small questions, are they, Walter? I'll try, I'll answer the first question first. I feel like that's a little simpler, in that I think there is the need for a lot of the activity that statistics, national statistics offices have held inside their organization. So quality, management of data, and this particular one goes to the second question, but some of the basic statistical practice around coverage and bias in data, and the, you know, that general understanding, and actually thinking about how they help the system overall develop those skills, and whether or not it's the statistical organization itself providing that service or being the stamper, or whether or not they actually, how do I want to say that, define a set of practices that others follow, which is kind of like we follow the fundamental principles and protocols for official statistics. I think there are services in the capability area, and I think those are particularly around linking, the ability to link data and the ability to tell cohesive stories. A lot of people can put out one figure, but how do you tell the narrative of what all of those figures mean together about where our country's at? And I think that's a service that we need to get better at providing and can provide. In relation to your second question, so well, New Zealand is small, our government is small and relatively flat. Statistics has not historically had a high political profile. I think it is the data revolution that has given the profile to the value of data, and the statistical practice is one that is seen in making that data asset valuable, because basically what you do is you provide it in a state where it's usable, with context, with quality parameters, and that makes it usable by other people. And I think that that having that trusted, usable, the independence, the impartiality, all of those characteristics that we took a little bit for granted are actually vital in gaining that access into that doorway and being able to talk about it. And it's funny because in COVID situations, and I was actually going to say we're 1 week away from our general election, and one of the points Ashita made earlier was, you know, how in this world of noise do you make sure that the data is out there? And this time we produced a page which wasn't designed at any particular party's manifesto, but it said, these are the New Zealand Now figures. These are the figures we stand by. These are what we've published. And, you know, we can help you use them well, but these are the figures. There isn't any others. And so I think it's using the skills and the experience and the credibility that we have and showcasing it in slightly different ways, from purely communication of statistics to communication of the story and what you're telling the public. I hope that answered your question. It was quite tough.
Thanks, Rosemary. Johannes, would you like to ask?
Yeah,
questions?
this is fascinating, very interesting. My question would go to Albrecht, but maybe also trying to bring Ayush. Albrecht, I think this was your trust cycle in terms of how to create more and better, how to get to more trust was very interesting. And what I understood is from a more sort of analytical perspective. I mean, you have to better safeguards, improve the methodology, and those kind of things that you would think of in the first place, in particular if you work at a statistical institute. However, wouldn't you think that part of even ordinary citizens per person trust, I mean, if somebody sees it's a Professor Wirtmann talking to me, you know, your legitimacy comes by the professor title and being a chief statistician or whatever. That's one part. But the other part is, I believe also, are you empathetic? Are you talking to me that I can understand? I mean, this communication aspect. And my little feeling is, or put it a bit provocative, your trust cycle seem to have missed this emotion part, this feeling part. Because if the statisticians get more and more better at explaining and digging deeper into analytics and methodology and safeguards, but if they miss the other part, the communication, the empathy, engaging, that certain data wouldn't speak or not speak to people, how do you integrate this into your trust cycle? And maybe then, Ayush, if you want to follow up, because you have been on both worlds, on the production side and on the now policy making side. So I would be also interested in your views. But maybe Albrecht, how do you think about this, you know, your trust cycle and the link to emotions, feelings, empathy, which you can actually also observe in COVID times? I mean, some of those professors have a lot of legitimacy in terms of academic, but maybe not necessarily in terms of convincing and making people trust in what they propose.
Thank you, Johannes. Difficult question. I will try to answer this question. I think this trust or issue towards, which is also a communication issue, is not new in COVID times, but it came up earlier, that in principle people did not find their personal situation that they perceive around them to be reflected in official statistics. I think this is, and this is aggravated, I think, in COVID times. And I think that, well, the one thing is then this input side, this methodological side, the transparency there. And the other side would be to take a look or to on the situation of the people, on the different situations of the people. Probably we had too much focus on averages and on the big picture. We have to think about smaller groups and their reality that they perceive. And I think that with these new data, there is also a chance in doing that, because we can have a higher timely granularity, but also a higher spatial granularity of the data. So in principle, to take into account this personal situations, and then reflect in our communication also the specific situations and give answer to that. And also probably enter into communication with different different groups of civil society, of the society, also to have information. Rosemary talked about storytelling, so to give data with a background that is valuable for the perception of these different groups of society that are there. And I think this would be the key of gaining then more trust into the data that we produce, and also to provide the right information to the right audience. I think we have to diversify there, and we have to communicate, engage into communication there.
Thank you very much. Ayush, anything from your perspective on this question about, on the one hand, evidence and the issue about, that data has to be produced according to standards and good methodology and has to be vetted, versus, as Albrecht nicely put it, I mean, you have to also understand that you have to go beyond averages, you have to look at spatial considerations and looking at disaggregated data. So how do you think about trust and official statistics from that perspective?
Well, hello, everyone. I have actually prepared some slides exactly on this topic. And if you don't mind, I can share with you my views in this thematic area. Shall I?
Sure.
Good. So you see, I've been working for National Statistical Office, and now I am gone from statistics, but the statistics hasn't gone from me away. So I'm still very glad to participate in these big events, and I'm so happy to see all my colleagues in this important event, and very warm greetings to all participants and viewers of this important event. So I'm going to talk a little bit about statistics that actually speaks to us. The communication with users is very important. And what have we done in Mongolia when I worked at Statistical Office? So well, we defined actually the categories of the users, the current ones and potential ones, and we have selected them, meaning is it new users or old users? Is it ordinary users or business users, researchers, students, media, international community, whether it is at the government also, it has a lot of layers, whether it is the president himself or the parliament, prime minister, government agencies, departments. So each and every level has to have its own approach. So for ordinary users, it has to be interesting, it has to be speaking, it has to be very, very simple. To business users, it has to be very useful. So speaking to their business areas, like the population, like the trade information, the international, the same international diversities and so on. Of course, researchers and students are willing, or they need the raw data. They need more the metadata, where they can play with the data, where they can do their own analysis and so on. For the media, it is, of course, very high demand topics, like maybe in winter, it's the media is interested in pollution, in traffic statistics, and so on. So it has to speak to them, to the users of the data. Then how we did build users' trust in statistics. So it has, as said again, it has to be interesting, and we have conducted users satisfactory surveys, so we could see what is speaking to them and what is not very much speaking to them, and where are the areas to improve, to make some improvement. So the feedback was received through the NSO website. We have renewed our website also, which is called 1212. We put a lot of interesting and simple statistics, like name statistics and the other ones, which was very much interested. The people are very much interested into statistics where they can play with. So we have organized press conferences for media and users every month, and we had also a lot of, how to say, trainings I have been working almost as journalist myself. I have been every Friday I have been going to the national television and had a morning session explaining in 10 minutes just the statistics which could be interesting to the others and what we are actually doing and what is the newest survey and so on. So as a head of NSO, as a chairperson, you have to take also the championship on your shoulders. You have to go out and you have to speak to the public and to the society itself, that so that people would also see that statistical office is actually not sitting behind closed doors and not just sitting in their offices, but also willing to act and to speak and to explain. The more you explain, the more they trust you. And it is important to have, of course, the international methodology. So the data that we have provided on our platform was in Mongolian as also in English. So that gave us the opportunity to be comparable to other countries and to say, you see, this is what we have in Mongolia, and this is what the other countries have. Of course, international donors are very important there to build the trustworthiness, to build also the public awareness. That's where Mongolia was a member of EGDDS and regularly updated metadata and all other information on National Statistical Development Program. So we really did actively engage, not only in Mongolia itself, but also regionally and also at international level. So you see, I have been very loudly and actively participating in the statistical community, at international events. So, and I'm also glad, again, even when I'm gone from statistical community, I'm still invited and I can be still part of this huge community, and as a now as a sitting partner on the other parts of the table, I am really now demanding for better and quicker and good data. So the data is not produced only by statisticians, but also the administrative data is very important. So I'm almost working at my ministry just like at National Statistical Office also, and saying that the data, that the administrative data that we are having, we have to share it with other ministries, we have to share it with the public, so only then we can have better and smarter decisions and better and smarter policies. Only then we can, change the lives of our people for the better. So the high quality census and surveys is the job from NSO, strengthening collaboration on the monitoring the data sources and compilation of administrative data with government agencies is now also my job in this new position. The training of all users is very important. Data literacy is the key of trust of the public into the data. So the people are always afraid of the data they don't actually understand. So the more training we give, the more simplify we the data, the more trust is coming with it. So international standards is, of course, a must. Then the dissemination in all possible ways. Like we have, when I got to NSO, we started to post on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and all possible ways, because the people are now not reading newspapers or watching only TV news as in old days. So the new telecommunication ways are in all our lives. So we have to see where the user are, so we can also provide the data in their current environment in their current the forms, like infographics and so. Of course, data confidentiality is very important, but making the data available is very important in all ways of open data sources. So with that, my information is finished. Yeah, that's all from my side, Johannes.
Well, thank you so much, Ayush. This was a great perspective from somebody. I mean, most of the people watching this video will know you, but I should at least introduce you for those who don't. Aruyuzana Ayush is currently Minister for Labor and Social Protection in Mongolia. And as Ayush mentioned, you have a very distinguished career, both as a chief statistician, and you have had several key positions in the UN statistical community. You have been a co-chair of the high-level group, and you are currently the Paris 21 chair. So we are very happy to have your perspective here. It was very interesting to listen to you and to point out to the point of data literacy as a key critical factor. One of your effective factors was data literacy, which seems to be key. And maybe we want to come back to this in terms of strengthening trust, because one thing is, it seems to me that many people, even those who are more educated, struggle a big deal to fully understand what's currently going on, even with the R values and infection rates, and compare numbers between March and today and why they can't be compared. And so it's really interesting to see, and this is a good opportunity maybe to bring in Walter also into the conversation. Walter, we are so happy to have you on this panel. Walter Rademacher is the former Director General and Chief Statistician of Eurostat, and he is now the President of FENStats, the Federation of European National Statistical Societies. Walter is also very active. I follow him on LinkedIn. He's very engaged on Twitter. So he's somebody who is really following these conversations very closely. So Walter, I assume for you, with your long distinguished career, I don't know, I mean, maybe more like a personal question. How do you feel these days? I mean, if this is this COVID, I mean, probably nobody could have ever imagined COVID coming, right? But I mean, as a person who is interested in public policy debates in data and statistics, how do you feel these days about the conversation? Are you more or less, I mean, from an academic perspective, are you in that sense happy that there is finally data and statistics at the forefront of public debates? Or are you saying, oh my God, this is just goes nowhere and people don't get it, and it's a little bit of a disaster? Walter, what's your view?
Well, it's a little bit of a mix of both. On the one hand, I think it's really a huge opportunity for us statisticians. On the other hand, my impression is that so far we have not really made our pitch, that we have not really used the opportunity, because we are a little bit too humble, too conservative, too slow, not courageous enough, not political enough. So I think for many of us, it's the feeling that we might burn our fingertips, and that's the reason why it takes so long to express our opinion and to bring in our capacities and capabilities. And I fear, and this is my second fear, is that we have not learned the lesson from COVID for the next crisis. Because we are now talking also in this session very much about COVID, but the next crisis, maybe the even bigger crisis, is waiting and knocking at the door. This is climate change, biodiversity loss, and so forth. And that's a little bit also my question to Ayush, whether what we have learned in terms of the longer learning cycle. As we know, we have in statistics short-term cycles and long-term cycles in our adaptation and learning. And the long-term cycles in official statistics are really long. They are 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. The last review of the SNA took 15 years. So if we were Steve Jobs, then we would ask us the question, how can we anticipate the needs of the society in 2025? Because it takes at least 5 years for us to, to prepare our systems so that we, in that moment of time, have the statistical product that will be needed. And I think we have to a little bit anticipate the risks and to start now with preparing products that are not yet really asked by the society by now. And this is my fear, that again, we might be in a situation in 5 years from now, that, for example, if we take biodiversity, that we have not prepared our statistical systems to give an answer to a kind of monitoring system for the loss of biodiversity, change in ecosystems, and so forth. So that we have discussed 20 years. So the revision of the SEA, for example, is ongoing since years. And so it takes us much too long to prepare and not to anticipate what will be needed tomorrow. This is, let's say, to be very honest in our discussion. Okay, so I think I can be relatively short in explaining that the situation of statistics has changed and that statisticians have to really understand that the quantification is not only a way to describe our world, but it is also a tool able to transform it. And this is, how to say, an understanding of what can happen with our numbers, facts, figures, and graphs, whether they are properly used, whether they are misused or abused. And we have to understand what are the reasons and the situation when evidence-based decision-making is turned into the opposite. Decision-based evidence-making. Or what happens when our numbers and facts are crossing the way and the interest of the mighty and politically powerful people. And of course, we have observed in the last 4 or 5 years that the political powerful are not always happy with statistical facts and the messages included therein. So I would like to go back to the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall, because this was a situation in the 1990s when many countries from the Eastern communist dictatorships had to change their statistical systems to a new function in democratic societies. And in that moment of time, there was a need to set up a kind of governance which protected the statistical offices. And the approach chosen at that time, and here you see the statistics, a matter of trust. This was a report in the United Kingdom. You see the fundamental principles of the UN, and you see the European Statistics Code of Practice. And the basic assumption behind all of these approaches is that the rule of law is accepted by the powerful people, rule of law prevails, and that we have, how to say, also an acceptance of facts, factfulness, as Hans Rosling would have said. So factfulness and the rule of law are the two more or less starting points for the setup of this post-Cold War statistical governance system. And the idea was to protect statistical offices in such a way that they can build up a kind of authority. And this was done under the assumption that you have a kind of closed shop where statistical offices could control all the processes from, let's say, the collection of data all the way down to the dissemination of tables, graphs, and figures. So a kind of closed shop, the quality control within that closed shop. Now, the the thing is that, of course, this governance approach has a lot of strength, and it has helped us a lot. So in particular, in the European Union, it is based on legal codification, and this kind of quality governance can be enforced and tracked. Quality can be certified and reviewed, and de facto official statistics independence had been tremendously strengthened. So this is the strength. But there are also weaknesses of this approach. As I said, it depends on the functioning of the rule of law. So if the powerful do not play with this rule of law, then you have got a problem, because then it does not help. And if the powerful dispute and disagree with the facts, and they introduce something like alternative facts, then you have got a problem. And secondly, it is a kind of defensive strategy where statistical offices are built like fortresses, let's say in concrete. So like an armed knight who is very, very defensive, but not any longer flexible, innovative, and not open for partnerships. And this is the main problem, as Albrecht Wirtmann has introduced. We need now a more open form of statistical offices, which is able to create partnerships with other players. So this kind of fortress is no longer a kind of perfect system for the governance of the future. The last weakness is that, of course, the international enforcement and monitoring of the situation within countries was based on very scattered anecdotal evidence. So we have discussed up and down the case in Greece. We have discussed up and down the Argentinian case, but we have not discussed many, many other cases which happened at the same moment of time, because we were lacking corresponding evidence. And that's why we from Fenstat have discussed with other statistical societies, like the American Statistical Society, the ISI, a kind of complementary approach, which is inspired by the Statisticiens Sans Frontières and the index they produce, which is the index of the independence of journalism. So it's the World Press Freedom Index. And the idea is to follow up this kind of approach by using the OECD concept of integrity. So if you go to the OECD website, you would find a kind of integrity approach, which is a kind of a guideline for the modern public sector, which is integer, it's free of corruption, and which has a very open, is very open-minded and open to an interaction with its citizens. And the idea that we have in mind is that complementary to the classical governance approach, which is protecting statistical offices, we statistical societies should come in using the OECD approach of integrity and let's say producing a kind of index which shows the situation in countries all around the world from a kind of global perspective and a global NGO. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Walter. I think this was a really insightful way of putting all the elements together, because so far our discussions had alluded to building trust from the point of view of NSS. So kind of an inward-looking perspective, which focused on production, internal communication, improved governance. But if we are to be serious about the topic of trust and assessing trust, it's important to get outside of the system, go to civil society, make the systems more participatory, and then really assess how are we doing. However, one of the things that comes up whenever we talk about these measures is that, if you anticipate risks of unbiased empirical measures, that may demonstrate that official statistics may not be trustworthy. So we might be kind of digging our own graves, if putting it bluntly, or can measuring independence and integrity kind of run counter to the goal of cementing this protected positioning of official statistics? Like, how do you anticipate and mitigate some of this optics?
Yeah. So first answer, no. This is certainly not the aim. The aim is to help. The aim is to support. The interesting thing is, if you go to the OECD website that I have mentioned in my slides, then you would find a couple of elements which are listed there under the, let's say, integrity approach. This is digital government, infrastructure governance, innovative government, open government, for example. But it's not mentioned, surprisingly, it's not mentioned that let's say, a good modern government should be based on a reliable production of science and facts. So I also believe that here the OECD approach could be broadened and be more inclusive vis-a-vis our professions. And we are also in contact with the, let's say, International Science Council. They have the same problem because the scientists, they are under big pressure from let's say, politicians nowadays, as we know. So the aim is to assess the situation in countries, whether the culture is friendly to statistics, whether literacy is there, whether there is a awareness of the importance of statistics and science, and so forth and so forth. So, and if there is a kind of general statistically friendly atmosphere and environment around the statistical producers, now in French, en pluriel. So it's not only for protecting official statistics, but at the same time also for statisticians working in universities, in research institutes, and so forth, because they suffer from the same kind of, let's say, badly or unfriendly ecosystem around them. So if you have a society which is hostile against evidence, it's not prepared to digest good quality, then you've got a problem. And this is more or less the overall attempt that we have in mind.
Thanks, Walter. That was an interesting answer to a very provocative question. I'm looking at the other panelists in case they have questions for you, for your intervention, or for Ayush. Yeah, Rosemary, please go ahead.
Hi, Walter. That was really interesting. And I'm just wondering if in your consideration of what this index may or may not look like, are you looking at a country as a whole, or are you looking at potentially taking it down to the communities within a country? I kind of outlined the New Zealand situation previously, and certainly a number of communities, feel underdone by data. There's not enough data about them. It's not used in the right ways to support the changes they want to make in their lives. So I just wondered if you were as we're all requested, to move to more granular information, whether you've thought of that with this index.
Well, thanks, Rosemary, for the important question. I must confess that we are at the very beginning. So we have set up a group which will now discuss, so to say, the business case, the questionnaire, the survey that we have in mind, and also the governance of this, let's say, virtual NGO that we have in mind. And at that very early stage, I think I'm still collecting questions like yours, and I will take them on board. But I fear that at the beginning we will, how to say, play with self-assessments in the way that the OECD is doing generally on its website. So if you go to this integrity website, you will find a kind of interactive diagram where you can tick the different aspects of integrity. And these are the system, the culture, and the accountability with sub-elements. And then you can assess the situation in your country and in your environment. And I think in the first place, we will play a little bit with this kind of concept, adapted to statistics, because here it's for the, how to say, public sector at large. So this and that is not really necessary for us, and something might be missing. So the concept is to start from the OECD integrity approach and to adapt this to statistics and science in particular, and then play a little bit with self-assessment. And then, I say, by way of doing this, I think we will learn how to set up a kind of surveying system which year by year produces an index. So this is the way what we have in mind. And then we might come also to sub-communities.
Thanks, Walter. I also had a question on the index, in particular about, we're talking about trust, independence and integrity of official statistics, but in the whole discussion, we have also encountered that the modern data ecosystem has other actors which are interacting with each other. So whether, is your vision for the 3IS index towards a comparative or a relative measure, which is like of official statistics attributes vis-a-vis other non-official private sources, data from other sources, which is where you can get some trust differential. Also pertaining to Rosemary's earlier point that we have been taking some of the attributes of official statistics for granted, and independence is being one of them. So just a thought from my end, but I also see that Albrecht was looking to ask you a question as well. So maybe I pass the mic to him.
Thank you, Archita. Walter, I have some question to you concerning, you showed then, for example, the European Statistics Code of Practice. And of course, there is also a kind of a review process on the principles that are stated in this code of practice, and there are also indicators related to that. And there is a regular review process, at least within the European Union, about these ethical principles that are stated there. How far does your approach go beyond that, or would it also be possible then to integrate, for example, other parts of the society into this process, to make it on a broader basis? What I'm also observing is that, for example, well, we are talking about new data sources, but I think there has to be a mix of new existing data producers, because also I think if you then taking the role out of official statistics and statistical offices, that they are not able to produce data, then there will be other producers of data, but nobody can say that something about the quality of these data. So in principle, there's also an issue of assessing these other data producers then, for example, and also having no data, of course, then also deprives then the society of the possibility of executing this control function that is there with having the data. And of course, there is also this issue of data literacy. So in principle, the users of the data should be enabled to know how to use the data, how to assess this data. And this is also a bit independent of the statistical offices producing this data, of course, they can contribute to that, but it's also a question to the education system as such. So how do you position yourself into these three different areas?
Mm-hmm. Well, firstly, if we look at the World Press Freedom Index, it's also an index which is produced based on two legs. It's a survey asking journalists on the ground in the countries how they assess their own situation, their personal situation. And the second is a kind of expert-based assessment. And I think here we could also imagine a kind of mix that in those cases, like in the European Union, where you have a kind of review of the adherence to the code of practice, that this gives you a kind of expert input to the index. But the second is really to ask the professionals on the ground, working in universities, working somewhere, how they assess the situation in their country. So this would be, for example, also in European countries, asking the members of statistical associations or societies, which are not necessarily working in the statistical office, but in a university, how they assess the statistical situation in their country. This is the approach. How and this is then a very holistic approach, including literacy in particular, but including also the behavior of politicians. Whether you are really free to research, or whether there is pressure put on your, let's say, on your institute. So scientific misconduct and this kind of this kind of things. I hope I have answered your question. So it's complementary. It's the viewpoint. It should be the viewpoint of professional statisticians in countries around the globe. This is the subjective. You might compare this with objective well-being and subjective well-being. So it's the subjective well-being of statisticians in, let's say, Luxembourg, New Zealand, Hungary, the US, Brazil. So I mix a couple of names now, not mentioning that there might be problems in one or the other of these countries at the moment.
Well, thank you so much. I'm very conscious now of timing. This has been a fascinating discussion and time flies by. If I may, under the control of Ashita, of course, and Sasha, one maybe final question to Ayush. I think the conversation has just, I think these statisticians sans frontières, and our societies friendly to statisticians and statistics, you can also turn it around. Are statisticians friendly to societies? I mean, I think some of the points you made in the beginning, Walter, were more alluding to, I think it has to be both, right? I mean, and it's good to look at both. One way that eventually statisticians could be, I'm sort of exaggerating, of course, here a little bit, could be more friendly to societies would be to talk and to engage more with citizens, not only on what we have discussed before, like empathy and disaggregation, but also to take more seriously what kind of information citizens provide themselves, and information data, not statistics per se, citizen-generated data. And that may be a field that, at least what we observe, the community hasn't maybe so engaged enough for different reasons, I believe. I think we have been always more comfortable to engage with the private sectors and seeing if we can harness and use their data. But what comes from citizens was a little bit always more suspect. Lobby groups and who are citizens anyway, and what would they tell us? And Ayush, any views on Mongolia? Is there any engagement with citizen groups? I mean, I'm speaking now about providing feedback on, could be on a very municipality level, could be the state of play of a soccer court, could be if the bus comes at time, could be a health system, could be if the teachers are absent or not. I mean, this is a very localized, often localized municipality approach. So are you aware of any initiative, I mean, from your own personal life where citizens in Mongolia are engaged in some way of providing data that is in some way used later on?
I think so, because the data usage in Mongolia has been very actively raised in recent years. Even talking about SDGs, you know, with the SDGs and all the indicators and all the progress and so on, the UN agencies themselves are very actively involving the citizens. Actually, what is actually the citizens generated data? So it is the data that people or the organizations produce to directly monitor what they need, right? So what changes or issues that affect them. Just recently, Statistical Office of Mongolia has conducted the deliberate polling in Mongolia on constitutional changes. So the citizens have been participating themselves in this constitutional changes issues. Now, the government of Mongolia is also trying to implement the deliberate polling in municipalities, in like so the people can choose what they want to be implemented in their area of living. And as you said, the more citizens are involved into this data community, the more trust will be there. Also, the partnership with other agencies, all the other data producers is very important. We know that statistical community is actually always talking to themselves, like, you know, in all these events, we see all the same faces, all the same colleagues, and the event, which is UN World Data Forum, the third one that we are actually having now, is also a place to gather with all the other partners and all the other producers of the data. The geospatial community, for example, is very important also to engage with statisticians. And I remember participating or being invited to this event during the UN General Assembly, the side event, which was also on data and SDGs. And there were a lot of very active community of data producers, but I didn't really see statisticians there. And it was funny. I said, statisticians don't bite. So please do invite us and talk to us and be friendly to statisticians, because we are friendly and we are really open to communicate. But we are also in our first steps in learning how to express ourselves in more, you know, in this flexible and new ways. So please do be very kind to us, statisticians, right? Thank you.
Thanks, Ayush. I think those remarks summed up some of our sentiments pretty well. And we're nearing towards the close of the session. So I'll just wrap up by saying that, you know, given the urgency and stress of the current situation, we seem naturally focused on immediate and urgent policy demands. And as Walter reminded us that, you know, taking a broader and longer term perspective is essential. The challenges, you know, of socioeconomic inequality and climate change are here to stay with us. The next crisis is probably around the corner. However, at the same time, we're also asking a lot from our national statistical systems. So we need them to produce trusted smart statistics. We are asking them to become the central coordinator and, the steward, become friendlier, communicate proactively. So the question of capacity remains, and going forward, investment in these foundational data systems and national statistical systems would be key to prioritize and achieve trustworthy data and information landscape. For the final concluding remarks, I would hand over back to Johannes.
Well, there's not so much final of concluding of the conclusion, which were already excellent. Now, so let me really, first of all, thank you all, in particular, Rosemary. It must be very late now at your end of the world. And then Ayush, it's a little earlier, but already also late. For Walter, Albrecht, and for all of others is just about lunchtime. So no, really thank you for taking the time. And I think we had a great discussion. I think we discussed quite a few different aspects and entry points. And it seemed to me that this is, it's not the end of a conversation, it's the beginning of a conversation, right? I mean, this on the one hand, we have said that trust and official data has been discussed for quite some time. We also saw that the COVID is an amplifier of this conversation. And I'm pretty sure, and I think you would all agree with me, with the months to come, it will be getting hotter. It will be getting hotter, the debates in all societies about the second wave and about how data and statistics is driving results, and some of the aspects we discuss of how and if statisticians should engage and be sort of be part of the conversation. On the other hand, I also really appreciated what Ashita was just mentioning, Walter's point about the long-term perspective and a huge point about SDGs. I think we shouldn't, forget we have a framework, an agreed framework. We have still 10 years to go, and in that sense, it's good to see Rosemary's, shining New Zealand example of we can do something. I mean, there are some small steps, sometimes a little bit bigger steps. And in that sense, I would like us to end on a positive, optimistic tone. We have a couple of good ideas. I think definitely, I mean, I can say this, I'm not a statistician. I'm in this field for roughly a decade. And I've really seen over the last 10 years that when I came into this debate, I would agree that I think Ayush, you said it, it's a very closed circle, and I have been in other closed circles. I'm a trained agricultural economist, and agricultural economists like to talk to agricultural economists all the time. The statisticians are even more closer because I think it's a smaller tribe. On the other hand, I see a lot of opening, a lot of more engagement. And I think that's something we should continue to do and to engage in societal debates. And with that, I'm pretty sure will also be helped to increase trust in data and statistics, in evidence, and in policy-driven important decisions. So with this, let me draw this to a close. Thanks again, also in particular to Sasha for being the technical ceremony master, and of course to Ashita. I think Ashita really deserves a clap of hands from all of us. She put everything alone together. From wherever she works. So Ashita, wonderful job. And thank you so much. And we will be in touch.